By now, most of you are well aware that online personality tests are inaccurate, unreliable, shouldn't be trusted with the final result. But you know, I see a lot of people take that knowledge and just be like, well, I'm not going to trust the result of any test I take. I'm just going to not take any tests. I'm going to type myself with other methods. And you know, even though these online tests may be inaccurate, but they're not completely worthless. You can still take a few of these online MBTI tests and get some useful data out of them. You know, for example, if you score 100% sensor, you're probably not an intuitive. You know, you score 100% feeler, you're probably not a thinker. You know, the percentages don't mean like, you know, you score 60% I, it doesn't mean you're 60% introvert. It means this test is 60% certain that you're an introvert. So, you know, use that information for how it's meant to be used. Look for the certain results and then use that to narrow it down. Sometimes I get people on the forums saying things like, I'm trying to figure out if I'm an ISTP or an INFJ. You know, I think it's one of those two. Okay, so obviously this is somebody who is trying to type themselves using the functions. You know, they figure out there's some kind of combination of TI, SE, FE, NI, and they're just not sure which order they use those functions. And you know, they narrowed it down to ISTP and INFJ. That's 3 letters off. You're telling me you can't tell if you're a sensor or an intuitive, thinker or feeler, perceiver or judger? Any of those 3 things could be a good tiebreaker. What did you score on? What do you score on MBTI tests? You know, do you score either ISTP or INFJ? Do you ever score INTP, ISFJ? And look at the percentages. Which is, you know, which ones are certain, which ones are less certain? You know, if you think you're either ISTP or INFJ, and then you figure out you're, you know, like 90% certain you're a feeler, guess what? You're an INFJ. You're not an ISTP. You could even use the Kersey temperaments. You know, you're telling me you can't tell if you're an SP or an NF? Those are like completely opposite temperaments. You know, so just like I said in another video, you know, if you're confused about your type, don't rely on just one method of figuring out your type, because then you're just gonna get stuck. Same thing goes for Enneagram tests. You know, I see a lot of people, you know, confused about their Enneagram type, and they say, oh, I took a few different tests and I got 6 on one test and 5 on another test and 9 on another test. You know, okay, I made the same mistake, okay? So I'm just kind of trying to teach you from my own mistakes. Okay, but you know, most of the Enneagram tests will rank your likely types in order. You know, you have type 5 as your top result, and then type 2 is your next result, and then type 4, you know, and it'll rank all the types according to the likelihood that you're that type. And people just ignore those rankings. They just look at the top result that the test says you are, and then they just take that, and then the next time they take a test, they don't remember what the previous results. They just remember their top result on the last test. They don't know if like this, you know, the top result on the second test they took was anywhere near the top on the first test they took. And so, you know, then they have to just start all over from scratch and figure out their type. Well, chances are each test you take, your actual type is going to be, you know, somewhere in the top half. And like, if type 8 is last on every test you take, you know, you're not a type 8, okay? You can, you know, pretty much tell that much, you know. Unless, of course, you're a type 8 and you're just doing that on purpose, you know, you'll be like, you know, this test doesn't control me, I control this test. I can make this test bow to my will. Whatever. I mean, we know Enneagram tests are unreliable, probably even more unreliable than MBTI tests, but you can still get some useful data out of them and use it to narrow down. You know, of course, don't rely on just the tests themselves. You know, read up on all the Enneagram types, read up on, study the instinctual variants, the wings, the tri-types, you know, the core fears and motivations of each type and each variation of that type. But just like with narrowing down your MBTI type, you know, with your Enneagram type, you got to use all these different methods if you're, you know, if you're confused in the slightest. don't just take this black and white attitude of like, oh, these tests are unreliable, all tests are bad, stay away from them. Take the tests anyway and use what useful information that they do tell you. Okay, maybe it's useless if every MBTI test you take, your results are like near 50% on each of the attributes. You score like, I'm 50-50 IE, 50-50 SN, 50-50 TF, 50-50 JP, and so, well, okay, that test didn't tell you anything. Or an Enneagram test. Take multiple Enneagram tests and you get like, 9 on top, and then 5, and then 3, and then 2, and the next test you take, you get like 4 on top, and then 7, and then 8, and then 1, and and then you're testing all over the place in every test you take. Then the test results are useless. And if that's the case, then chances are you're not even really thinking much about your answers. You're probably not even really taking any tests seriously. You're answering according to like how you just happen to feel that day or that minute, and then you got bigger problems. Okay, you obviously need some sort of guidance in figuring out your type, and if you're one of those people, please ask somebody other than me. Okay? Yeah. Okay. It's cold. I'm going back inside. Use that to narrow it down. Yeah, exactly.